Welcome to Compound Insights, a podcast by CFA Society New York. I'm your host, Rob Rowan. Today we're speaking with Lindsay Kelleher. She is a policy manager at the Blockchain Association. She joined the association after participating in Teach for America in San Francisco Bay Area. Prior to TFA, Lindsay attended Princeton University, studied history and Spanish, and was the team captain of the varsity women's water polo team, which we just had a nice conversation about. So welcome to the podcast, Lindsay.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Rob.
So I think this has been a massive year of change. So I wonder if you could just first give the members who are listening to this podcast an idea of, from your perspective at your rare spot, how all of these regulatory changes have come out. So maybe you could start with a laundry list of them.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest ones, and I think one of the most outstretched ones for the year of 2022 was President Biden's executive order on digital assets, which came out in late February, early March. And essentially what that executive order did was designate a sort of variety of federal regulatory agencies to create reports around digital assets, their illicit finance risks, their consumer protection risks, looking at the environmental impact, and then also looking at CBDCs. So those reports have come out, and there were a number of legislative recommendations that were put forth in there. But ultimately, that was probably, while there was so much hype around the executive order, that was probably the least interesting thing that has happened this year. But that was probably one of the more headline catching pieces of regulation legislation that has come out. Another big thing, there's been a ton of sort of judicial lawsuits that have come out, and they're sort of trying to decide the extent to which regulation applies. So, for example, the infrastructure bill, which was voted into law in 2021, there were several crypto provisions within that were supposed to be implemented by the end of this year. There has been a lawsuit against one of those provisions, 6050I, which it's being funded by Coin Center. So that lawsuit is currently going on, and Treasury has actually extended the date that the infrastructure bill will be implemented within the United States law. So that's another regulatory change. Then there was the ATS rulemaking that the SEC put forth and asked for public comment on. There's been sort of the public rulemaking process, and now we're waiting for finalization of that rule. And we're expecting that if that rule is finalized, and essentially what that rule does is expand the definition of what a broker could be, so that potentially DeFi protocols could be included. And it's broad and ambiguous. And so if that rule were to be finalized, we would expect to see a lawsuit there. Then another sort of regulatory change that came out was the tornado cash sanctioning, which the Treasury Department did. And what essentially they did was sanctioned a privacy enhancing tool that many blockchain cryptocurrency users use to give themselves more privacy in this ecosystem. And so with that sanctioning, there has been another lawsuit that has been put forth. So that is also currently being sort of adjudicated as well. So then some other regulations that have come out are stablecoin legislation and spot market legislation. Those have been proposed and debated, and you can see that all over Twitter and other news outlets. And those are both still sort of in the works and in flux. But yeah, that's sort of just a brief snapshot of some of the regulatory changes and issues that are at top of mind for myself and other staff at the Blockchain Association.
Yeah, so that's massive. That's federal regulation, SEC, which is Fed also. I guess that lawsuit was also in federal court.
Yes.
The CoinDesk one is in the federal court.
Yes.
So this has breath. It's not state stuff. It's
There is state stuff too, but for our association, we're a smaller association. Our bandwidth there's so much going on at the federal level that even getting to the states is sometimes a bit of is tricky for us. But there is also state level regulation and legislation that's coming down as well.
So something you mentioned in there that I do think is kind of interesting and would be great to hear from your perspective is you mentioned that some of this is a little broad and not quite so specific.
Yeah.
Do you think these things are all rubber hitting the road real important for coin or DeFi? Or do you think some of them are just a little sort of nothing burgers? How would you describe all that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what is going on right now is sort of signaling the intent of the regulators. Gary Gensler in particular, the chairman of the SEC, has said on multiple occasions that he wants to regulate DeFi. And so while, for example, this ATS rulemaking that was put out by the SEC, there's no mention of DeFi at all because it's written so broadly, it could be applied there. And so it's sometimes a matter of a crypto lawyer's own paranoia that it could be relevant. But I do also think, it's part of the job to really analyze these different rules and see if they could apply to crypto. And part of that is because I think the technology underlying cryptocurrency and blockchain is so counter-traditional or not in the vein of what current regulation is going after. And so it's hard. Sometimes the regulators won't even know that it will apply to the technology, or it might not be the intent of regulators, but inadvertently it captures this technology because of the broadness with which it was written.
Okay. So have you seen, from your perspective, many changes in, say, the structure of DeFi companies, what they're doing, how they're indemnifying themselves, anything in reference to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. One of the primary propositions of DeFi is that it eliminates intermediaries, right? At the same time, though, accessing these blockchain decentralized networks is difficult for someone who is not versed in cryptocurrency and technology. So what happens is these companies will be formed to create DeFi front ends, and so that will just essentially make it easier for users to access these DeFi protocols. And so some DeFi protocols are on their own implementing certain, illicit financing guardrails. Others, because of uncertainty, they're shutting down in the US and going elsewhere where they're not under so much threat. And others are really trying to work with the regulators, with members of Congress to really educate about how and where regulation needs to be applied in the DeFi space. So I think there's a real mix of what these companies are doing. But yeah, there is a ton of movement from these different DeFi companies for sure.
Yeah, and just to follow up to that, it sounded like, sometimes whenever there's this whole report of certain types of companies or wealthy families leaving the U.S., it becomes a big thing in the news.
Yeah.
But it did seem like it was all that many companies that left because of the regulation.
Yeah, so I think one thing is companies might not leave, but other companies will decide not to even, domicile in the United States because they're too afraid. For another example is like companies that are trying to come in, they simply can't because there's just not enough clarity. For example, FTX, which is one of the largest crypto exchanges in the world, 95% of their products are not available to US users. So, it's not only that they're leaving, but it's almost as if there's sort of like this regulatory moat around the US and it's hard to enter. It's really hard to get involved here because there's this sort of hostile stance from the regulators that is making it hard to operate in the US.
Right. Understood. So I know this is difficult to say, but where do you see the broader regulation trend going?
Yeah. So I think right now it's very interesting because if you look at it globally, a lot of regulators are focusing on centralized exchanges and more custodial, operations where it does resemble the traditional financial system in a way. So the regulation can be appropriately transitioned from, the traditional finance world onto these custodial exchanges. And so you'll see, across the world, regulations are being created to sort of make, guardrails for this section of the industry. And then you sort of see some countries, like the EU, for example, they don't feel like they have a good enough hold on DeFi. And so what they've actually done in their big crypto regulation called MiCA is they've carved out DeFi from it entirely. And they're going to study it. They're going to put a report together on it and really try to understand it better. Then you look at the US, and I think there's just, unfortunately, I think we just really don't know what to do yet. I think there's a certain section that wants to regulate DeFi, ban it, and try to get it out of the United States. And there's a section that, doesn't really know what DeFi is, but, their regulators, they need to, help their regulators and legislators, they need to sort of create a safety net for their constituents. And then there are, the DeFi proponents that really want to make sure that acknowledge that regulation needs to be within the space, but want to make sure it's done right so that it doesn't kill the industry. And so I think it's really a broad spectrum of what could happen, and ultimately which party is going to win over in the US. I don't know, but I do hope they sort of, take a note from the EU and go down the path of studying it and really making sure that there is a full understanding before regulation were to be applied.
Okay. Well, that is exceptionally interesting because the EU tends to be a little bit behind on monitoring systemic risks in a way the US is a little better at after the 2008-9 thing.
Yeah. I mean, you would think, but it's interesting in terms of regulation for crypto. I would say the US is really one of the most, probably the farthest behind it, if not one of the closer on the farther end of being behind of regulation.
So let me take a step back. So most of the people who are listening to this podcast are CFA charter holders, about 15 years of experience. And in their experience, they're probably looking at DeFi and coin as two different things.
Yeah.
DeFi is an opportunity. It's something they need to understand for the long run management, responsible management of their careers.
Yeah.
And coin is an investment they might make for their clients.
Yeah.
Or might not.
Yeah.
So if we could, for the rest of this, separate those two things into two different things for a second.
Yeah.
What do you think the investing public needs to understand about coin? Because there was a massive amount of interest in it. And then that interest became fickle and disappeared after the decline in Bitcoin prices.
Yeah.
So where do you see all that right now? What do people need to know about that?
So I think first, it's important do you mind just like building out what you mean when you say coin? Are you talking about a Bitcoin cryptocurrency? Or are you talking about all the cryptocurrencies in this space?
All of them, stable coins, Bitcoin, Dogecoin, everything.
So I think one thing that's critical to understand is that, stable coins, especially, and also cryptocurrency, more traditional cryptocurrencies, they really do underlie the DeFi market. So you really can't have DeFi without crypto.
Right.
But I think one of the biggest areas where I think more needs to be done is around education. I think there is a ton of hype around crypto, and you'll see it in the media, you'll see it all over Twitter, and you see the gains and the returns that users are getting, and people get excited and want to be a part of it. But I think it is a complex asset that people really need to understand. So I think I would say do your due diligence, learn what the technology is, do your reading, understand what the underlying risks of the technology could be before you before you make an investment in a specific coin. I do think, some of these coins have really proven themselves to be stable and solid and, have carved a really substantial percentage of, usage in the United States. I think I saw one statistic was like 16% of the US population has some sort of investment in cryptocurrency.
I saw it was high. The Economist reported it was higher than that.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah,
I've
the
seen like
Economist said 25%.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've only seen 16, but 25. I mean, it's reaching almost a level, or it's inching closer to a level of mass adoption. And, with mass adoption, though, there needs to be a requisite level of education. And so, you see certain foundations that are coming out to really address that. I want to put a shout out and plug one of my colleagues, Cleb Mesidor, who just started the Blockchain Foundation. And so that is aiming to be is sort of a repository and database of verified, peer-reviewed articles and educational resources about crypto, so that investors who maybe are trying to get into the space have a place they can go to educate themselves, as opposed to just, seeing some cool coin getting shilled on Twitter, Instagram, whatever, and then, investing immediately. So I am a firm believer in the power of cryptocurrency and blockchain, but I will say there are scams out there, and investors need to make sure that they understand the technology and they understand what might look like a good investment, what might not look like a good investment, understand what scams have occurred in the industry and how to avoid those. And so, I think education is a big, big thing.
Well, that's a wonderful thing to hear, because that's why, of course, those of us who work here at CFA Society New York do so. We have a foolhardy belief in education.
Yes, I am in agreement with that.
All right, so this is great. Well, thank you. I just want to point out to the members who are listening to this that, as I mentioned earlier, Lindsay was a speaker at CFA New York earlier this year, and you can watch the video of that session, if you like, on our website if you're a member. And if you're listening to this and you're not a member, please also remember that you need not be a CFA charter holder to be a member. With comparable work experience can also qualify. So, Lindsay, thank you again for being here.
Yeah, Rob, thank you. This was so wonderful talking to you. And I love speaking on your panel. It was such a pleasure. And I love the work that CFA is doing.
And I'm sure we'll have you back again sometime soon.
Yes, great. Thank you so much, Rob.
Thank you. Bye now.